Madam Speaker, I'd first like to thank members of the House for a very rich debate over the last 2.5 days. We've discussed a wide range of topics, but a few themes stick out in the debate. Members agree, everyone agrees with the need for us to transform our economy, and everyone agrees that we need to build a fair and equitable society, and we are taking important steps forward. The Pioneer Generation package was spoken about by virtually every member of the House, and you all lent strong support for the government's plans to honor the Pioneer Generation. We heard many heartwarming stories that brought the spirit of our pioneers vividly to life. There were also many other specific issues which are going to be taken up in the Committee of Supply, specific issues to do with protection of low-wage workers, Mr. Zainal Sapari, for instance, issues to do with benefits for the self-employed, Mr. Ang Hin Kee, some issues to do with specifics about particular sectors, prefabrication in the construction industry, for instance, Mr. Teo Ho Pin, issues to do with arts and heritage, Ms. Janice Koh, issues to do with the preschool sector, issues to do with work-life balance, green vehicle schemes, and so on. So many specific issues have come up, which I'm sure will be taken up in the COS debate. What I would like to do is to concentrate on the three main themes that have come up in the debate and which are also, in fact, three main themes in the budget. First, how we can move towards a higher productivity, higher income economy and society, one with a productive and vibrant SME sector, and one with good jobs and good futures for all Singaporeans. Second, how we are honoring our pioneer generation, and beyond our pioneer generation, how we are building a system of quality and affordable healthcare for all Singaporeans. And third, importantly, I want to talk about how we will have to balance our budget for the future as our infrastructural and social needs go up over time. So three important themes. One is thought of as economic, although at the heart it's also social. The second has to do with social spending, particularly healthcare. And the third has to do with how we balance our budget over the long term. Before I go into the first main theme, the economic challenge of restructuring, let me first deal with the issue of costs, which many MPs have raised, and rightly so. First, the issue of cost of living. Second, the issue of business costs, particularly for our SME sector. And I'll speak about each of these two aspects of costs in turn, cost of living and business costs. First, cost of living, and some members, I think Mr. Nicholas Fang and Associate Professor Eugene Tan have mentioned the latest EIU report, which ranked Singapore the most expensive city in the world. And I know this is floating around and it's attracting a lot of attention, but I don't particularly want to focus on this report in its own right, but to explain a couple of very basic things about the reports that will come out from time to time, whether it's EIU or Mercer, which are really aimed at measuring expatriate costs of living in different parts of the world. And they're useful tools for HR managers and corporate HQs as they decide where to place their people, and even when they're placing them in a particular place, how to compensate them adequately based on the cost of living. It's a useful tool. But these are basically aimed at comparing costs of living for expatriates in different cities or different countries in the world. And what this means, therefore, is two things make an important difference in these surveys, and two things in these surveys are quite different from the factors that affect the cost of living for locals, for Singaporeans. Quite different. First, currency. An important reason why, in fact, we have become an expensive place for expatriates is the Singapore dollar has strengthened. And indeed, the EIU report points this out. Singapore dollar has strengthened over the years, particularly in recent years, and it means it's a more expensive place for someone who's paid in a foreign currency or for a corporate HQ abroad whose earnings are in foreign currency. As the Singapore dollar strengthens, it becomes more expensive. But the reverse is true for Singaporeans. The stronger Singapore dollar improves purchasing power. The stronger Singapore dollar improves purchasing power both in Singapore because imported goods become cheaper, and for us, food and everyday items are all largely imported. Secondly, it improves purchasing power even when Singaporeans go abroad, and you can see that from the latest travel fair last week. So a stronger Singapore dollar, not sudden sharp appreciation, but steady appreciation, has been good for Singaporeans, but it does mean it becomes a more expensive place for expatriates. Second important difference has to do with what goods and services are being measured as part of the cost of living basket in these surveys. And the ERU consumption basket, I wouldn't knock it. It's they're inevitably subjective, but they're trying to put together a basket of what they think are expatriate costs, perhaps a little on the high end, but expatriate costs. And it's quite different from the goods and services consumed by ordinary Singaporeans, which our CPI basket, for instance, measures. So, for example, the ERU basket includes imported cheese, filet mignon. I'm not sure which restaurant that is, but filet mignon, Burberry-type raincoats. Burberry-type raincoats, not very common in Singapore, I think, but Burberry-type raincoats. And I, of course, know very little about this. I mean, 4 best seats in a theatre, 3-course dinners at high-end restaurants for 4 people. These are items in the cost of living basket, right? And I don't think they're relevant to an expatriate cost of living basket, but it's quite different from a cost of living basket for Singaporeans. And indeed, for some of these items, Singapore is expensive. Transport is also part of the cost of living basket for these expatriate indexes, but no public transport. It's just cars and taxis. And our public transport, as you know, is in fact significantly cheaper than most other cities, New York, London, Tokyo. We are about comparable to Hong Kong, but significantly cheaper than most other cities. Even our taxi fares are cheaper. But our cars are expensive because we are small. So for an expatriate, if you want to own a car, it is expensive in Singapore. But if you're talking about an average Singaporean taking public transport, it is in fact much cheaper than many other cities. So I highlight this just to point out the differences. It's not that these surveys are wrong. It's not that they are misguided. They're measuring something quite different from the cost of living for an ordinary local in different cities around the world. Now, there are in fact, unfortunately, not very many surveys that truly try to measure the cost of living for ordinary residents. But we have a very good study that was done by the Asian Competitiveness Institute in 2012, which compared purchasing power in different cities. And they specifically distinguish the cost of living for expatriates and the cost of living for a typical resident household. And they looked at all sources of data, including the ERU study, World Bank's International Comparisons Program, and they constructed consumption baskets for expatriates and for ordinary residents. And they found that Singapore was indeed quite expensive for expatriates compared to other cities. At the time of their study, Singapore was ranked fifth out of 109 cities in the index for expatriates. But costs for Singapore residents were very different. We were ranked 61st out of the 109 cities when you compare the cost of living for residents. Quite similar to other Asian cities like Hong Kong, which was ranked 58, or Seoul, that was ranked 60th. So that's the basic difference. And from time to time, these surveys will come up. I know some people will give it a spin, but it's measuring something quite different from the cost of living for our residents. What is important for us is that Singaporeans, and particularly lower and middle income Singaporeans, have incomes that grow faster than the cost of living. That's what's important. And in fact, that's what we have fortunately been able to achieve. In the last 5 years alone, if you take our middle income households, our median households, their incomes have gone up faster than the CPI index, than the cost of living. In fact, it's gone up by about 10% in real terms. Similar rate of growth for the low income household, about 10% in real terms. And indeed, for the low income household, if you exclude from the CPI index imputed rentals for those who are in fact owning their homes and they don't have to pay rentals, if you exclude that factor, then actually the increase in real incomes of the 20th percentile was 19% over the last 5 years. So significant improvement, and we keep our eyes focused on that. Keep our eyes focused on how the average Singaporean and the low-income Singaporean is doing in their incomes relative to the cost of living. Let me move on now to the issue of business costs and competitiveness. And expatriate costs are part of that equation. We should keep our eye on expatriate costs as well because it's part of the overall business cost equation. But the key challenge we face, Mr. Inderjit Singh, Mr. Dinakaran, Mr. Teo Song Seng, Mr. Ang Wei Ning just a short while ago, several MPs spoke about this, and Jessica herself, Ms. Jessica Tan had herself highlighted this as a challenge in her opening speech. There is a challenge of business costs. It has gone up. And it has gone up fundamentally because we haven't been doing poorly as an economy. Wages have therefore gone up. Rentals have gone up because the demand for space has been very strong. Demand for industrial space, demand for retail space, demand for office space. Demand has been very strong for businesses. And because supply was short of demand, rentals have gone up. Wages will go up as long as there's a tight labor market and there's a demand for labor. So demand in the economy is strong. Demand for resources, and especially labor and space. And that's why costs are picking up, fundamentally. The wrong strategy will be to weaken our economy, be a less vibrant economy. And you can think of many cities not so far from where we are, which are less vibrant, and the cost of living is lower. Cost of living is significantly lower because you don't have wage pressures and rentals are cheap. The cost of living is lower, but that's not what our business community wants, and that's not what Singaporeans want. So we've got to keep this a vibrant place, keep a check on costs to make sure they don't rise persistently faster than business profits or wages. That's our strategy. But accept that we are not going to be a cheap location for business. We are not going to be a cheap location for business. Now, how do we address it? I think it's if I can use a contrast that was in Mr. Yeo Guat Kuang's speech between two countries. A very interesting contrast, because Guat Kuang spoke about the difference between Hong Kong and Japan. In Hong Kong, retail rentals have gone up very sharply. In fact, the cost of land and cost of all properties, including homes, has gone up very, very sharply. So retail rentals in Hong Kong today are more than 7 times the price. Prime retail rentals, more than 7 times higher than Singapore. Very high. Their cycles are sharper than us. And they have, on a trend basis, I think, gone up much more than we have in terms of the cost of space. And in Hong Kong, they leave it to the market to restructure. Price goes up, costs go up, businesses have to restructure. They leave things much more to the market than we do, in fact, in Hong Kong. And the consequences, businesses have been restructuring. And the example which Mr. Yeo Guat Kuang gave was of how, because retail rents are now so high, businesses have shifted away from traditional clientele and traditional services towards catering to the high-end Chinese. And many Hong Kong residents are not very happy about that, but that has been the business adjustment. And he contrasted it to Japan, where you have rental protection, still quite extensive, even in Tokyo. Very extensive rental protection, and that's why you have lots of little, very charming ramen shops, craft shops, mom-and-pop shops, all surviving. But that is a strategy quite different from Hong Kong in another regard. It's not just that rents are cheap, but wages are stagnant, and opportunities for the young are very, very limited, as we all know. Japan has stagnated. So rents are cheap. Government has intervened to keep it cheap. The laws are still in place, but things are stagnant. So those are two quite different approaches, and I think we should avoid either extreme. Don't just leave it to the market, but neither can we fix rents and keep prices low and expect that the cost of living goes up at the same time. It doesn't work like that anywhere in the world. So what we have done is to try to mitigate the cycles. And when you look at industrial land, you look at retail space, that's our approach. And supply is catching up quickly. in the next 3 years, as I mentioned in the budget speech, we have in the next 3 years, just for multiple user factory space, the amount of new supply coming on stream in the next 3 years is going to be double the demand that we saw in the last 3 years. But, I mean, demand's not going to suddenly double, right? But supply is going to double. So I expect that that will have a moderating influence on rentals. And indeed, in the last quarter, we've already seen the industrial rentals fall by 1.4% in the fourth quarter of last year. Likewise for shop space, very substantial increase in supply that's going to be coming onto the market. So that's our strategy. We don't have perfect foresight, but when we see the market heating up, we take action to boost supply and find other ways to help businesses to mitigate costs. And one of the ways is what Ms. Jessica Tan, Dr. Teo Ho Pin, and some others spoke about, which is to help companies to save costs through the sharing of services. We're doing it through JTC's cluster industrial spaces like the Food Hub, Tuas Biomedical Park. And there'll be more such cluster concepts which enable companies and especially SMEs to share services. And this means reducing upfront investment costs that otherwise they'll have to do on their own. It also means lower maintenance costs over time. And Ms. Penny Low spoke about having more clusters for startups, like Block 71. She wanted more of those, and that's also a good idea. And Mr. Zaki Mohammed spoke about retail malls, helping retail SMEs to share services. So these are useful ways in which we can mitigate the rise in costs and help companies to have a more efficient model as well, a more efficient way of using their manpower and getting more value out of the space they occupy. Transport, again, an important business cost issue, and that's why we had not just road tax rebates last year, but we allowed for a further 5-year COE extension for vehicles who had already had their COEs renewed. It was really to help our smaller businesses. And this year we enhanced the early turnover scheme to lower the replacement costs for old commercial diesel vehicles. So those are important ways in which we can mitigate the cycle, mitigate business cost increases, and we are open to any other suggestions, any other practical and effective ways in which we can help. But the fundamental solution, and Inderjit had asked for a permanent solution. The permanent solution to address rising business costs is to raise productivity. That's the only permanent solution. We've got to upgrade our economy fundamentally. Because our costs, as long as we remain vibrant as an economy, our costs will basically approach that of an advanced country. A little higher in some areas, a little lower in some areas, but basically we'll have advanced country costs. And the only way for our businesses to survive in that environment is to have advanced country capabilities in innovation, in the commercialization of R&D, in managerial skills, and investing in employees so that they have deep skills. That's the only way. And we summarize it with a concept or measure called productivity, but it's actually about those things. It's about skills, it's about workplace culture, it's about automation, it's about innovation. That's the only fundamental solution. We've got to raise productivity, which brings me now to the first main theme of the budget as we look to the future. How can we achieve this higher productivity, higher income economy? Now, first, I think it's useful to take a step back. It's not as if we are a failing economy when it comes to productivity. It's useful to see where we have come from, and I'll show you a chart on how much, the journey we have traversed over the last 30 years. This is 1980. In 1980, this is the level of productivity compared to the US. I'm using US here for simplicity as a major advanced country, in many respects a leader in productivity. If you take US as 100, Singapore was basically about 40% in 1980, 30 years ago. So we were very much a developing country then, about 40% of the level of the United States and well below most developed countries. Fast forward 30 years, where are we now? We're now basically at about two-thirds of the level of in fact, it should be about 70%, sorry. It's about 70% of the level of the United States. So quite a major shift in 30 years from 40% of the US to 70% of the US. And we're almost at the level that the United Kingdom is at now. And in fact, we are, because of low service sector productivity in Japan, overall, we have the same level of productivity or slightly higher compared to Japan. So it is not a bad achievement that Singapore has taken this journey. Our SMEs, our people, everyone has taken this journey, and we've come a far way in 30 years. Now, there is a second challenge, however, as we go forward, that is not just about productivity, but it is, as Mr. Yeo Guat Huang again emphasized, it's about raising productivity while maintaining full employment, because that too is extremely important. And one of the unique things about what we have been able to achieve is that we have been able to achieve a rising employment rate, giving everyone an opportunity to have a job. In the last decade, in fact, if you look at Singapore, I'll have to explain this chart if you just focus on it one step at a time. It looks at the employment rate, that's the horizontal axis, and in the vertical axis, it looks at the level of productivity. And where we were 10 years ago, basically, level of productivity was one where we were about a little over 60% of the level of the United States then, but our employment rate was basically around 65%. Since then, our employment rate has increased. If you look at Singapore last year, our employment rate has increased significantly. It's not the highest in the world, but it has caught up with some of the advanced countries. It's now a little higher. It's about a little lower than what UK was 10 years ago, but we've caught up in employment rate. But it's a very important challenge for us to be able to raise productivity while providing jobs for all our citizens and opportunities for all of our citizens is a much bigger challenge than raising productivity by shedding jobs. And that is, in fact, what has happened in many countries. If you look, for instance, at the United States, if you look at the United States over the last 10 years, in fact, employment rate has come down significantly. Productivity has risen, but employment rate has come down significantly. Same thing in the United Kingdom. Employment rate has come down, productivity has moved up a little bit. And typically when they talk about employment rate coming down, it is the lower skilled that are the ones who are put out of the workforce. And we found a way in which we can have an economy where everyone has a role to play. The easy way to raise productivity is go through some shock treatment, shed firms, shed jobs, but the ones who will suffer in our case are the lower skilled and especially our older workers. But we've taken a more inclusive approach, and we should retain this inclusive approach as we go forward, which makes it a special challenge. Don't do it the way that some countries have done. Take a segment of your workforce out, and you get higher productivity almost automatically. You want to keep everyone in the workforce, but as Suisse says, make every job better. Make every job better. And that makes it a difficult challenge, but one which we can achieve. So I just want to highlight this fact, that it is about productivity in a full employment economy. That's our particular challenge, and that's what we are set about. How do we go about it? No one is satisfied by the rate of productivity growth in the last few years. It's been dismal, right, the last few years. But how do we go about it? What has the government's approach been? First, we've tightened foreign worker policy. Second, we've provided very substantial assistance for businesses to upgrade. Very substantial assistance. And that means principally providing our SMEs with assistance, because all our schemes, whether it's the PIC, the Transition Support Package, all our schemes have been skewed towards SMEs, because we know they're the ones who need the most help. The large firms are able to adapt to the market much more easily. They've got the resources up front to invest. It pays back over time. It's the SMEs who need more help. So most of our schemes are tailored to the SMEs. And if you look at the Transition Support Package, this is the second year, it's a 3-year package, 7.3 billion. About 80% of that goes to the SMEs. About 5.8 billion is very substantial assistance. And as I explained in the budget speech, it's not lathered equally across the whole system. Not everyone is getting the same, But some SMEs are getting a lot more than others because they are taking the initiative to put their own money in the game, to invest, to innovate, to invest in, to upgrade the skills of their people. So it's but substantial assistance that we are providing. So that's what we are doing, tightening labor market policy, providing strong support for businesses to upgrade. But productivity cannot just be summoned up. You can tighten the labor market, you can provide assistance, but you can't summon up productivity. That requires entrepreneurial energy and business leadership. That requires everyone striving to do a better job. That's how productivity goes up. On the government's part, every time we see an innovation, we see someone who's an early adopter doing something new, we will try to spread that innovation, help other firms adopt it in the same sector, try and scale up improvements. That's our approach. So this is a fairly fundamental point. The government can tighten labor supply, give companies an incentive to upgrade, it can provide strong support, but really businesses have to respond, management has to respond, and the government will then find every way to spread innovation and spread improvements throughout that sector and throughout the economy. That's our approach. And we have to let market forces work, which is the third dimension about it. It's about individual firms upgrading, it's about government supporting, but market forces have to work. And market forces will reward those who are upgrading, those that are more efficient, those that are more innovative. And the market needs time. Companies do not give up their business simply because they're doing poorly in 1 year. It takes time for the market to sort itself out, for the better businesses to move ahead at the expense of the rest. And how we pace our restructuring journey is therefore quite important. And there are two views in this debate on this. In fact, Ms. Lina Chiam had wanted us to accelerate the shakeout of firms and accelerate the consolidation of small firms. And that is one view. Mr. Inderjit Singh, Mr. Dinakaran, and several others felt that we've been moving too quickly in restructuring, that we needed to pause a little more, which is another view. And we have taken the middle path. First, avoid shock therapy. Avoid shock therapy because we know actually it takes time for market forces to work. And if we go with a shock therapy, good firms can be shaken out. Firms with a good future can be shaken out, and good jobs too can be shaken out. So we've avoided shock therapy, but we've got to have a steady clip in our restructuring effort. Be very clear about direction and keep a steady clip so that there is pressure on firms to upgrade. All the changes that we've done have been phased in. They're not sudden. The most significant are the changes in the dependency ratio ceilings, the DRCs, sector by sector, but they're all announced 2 years in advance, which is why this year and next year you'll see the final effect of the DRC cuts in the services sector that were announced last year. We phase in all our measures. Second, we try to avoid a cookie-cutter approach where there's only one formula for all firms and one scheme for all firms. And here, again, there are two contrasting views as to how we should go about government assistance. On the one hand, we have some views which have some merit. Ms. Jessica Tan, Ms. Lee Biwa, and others spoke about the need to make it easier for firms to qualify and take advantage of our schemes. Or as Ms. Lee Biwa says, provide the assistance faster. Another view, which Mr. Eugene Tan, Dr. Eugene Tan, and in fact, Ms. Lina Chiam and others expressed, was a more cautious one, which is that we must require firms to demonstrate productivity improvements first. Show proof before you get assistance. Mandate certain improvements as the requirement before you get assistance. And these are both meaningful views, and through the range of our schemes, we in fact have first a broad base of support that is easy to qualify for, secondly a second level of support that is more customized, where we work with the firms and we work for what we know are real improvements in productivity within a space of time. We need both approaches, in fact. It can't be only one approach of having companies show proof before they get assistance. Neither can it be a approach where the money is just being handed out liberally, upfront, no questions asked, because then you get what's called deadweight funding. You're just going to fund what the companies would have done anyway without assistance. So we need both approaches, and that is indeed our approach. The PIC, in fact, leans a little more towards the liberal approach, but it's not no questions asked. Companies know they qualify as long as they meet the criteria. But when it comes to the PIC cash scheme, where the money comes much earlier, we've had to put in a check in the system, which is the 3-employee rule. It's only for the PIC cash scheme, not for the PIC scheme at large, which is the major scheme. But for the PIC cash scheme, we did have to put in that requirement because it is easy to abuse. So those are some of the practical challenges we face when devising government support. How fast do we move? Second, do we have a system which allows liberal use of funds with no questions asked, or do we place requirements that have to be met before assistance is provided? And we try to find the right balance, and we'll improve as we go along. So let me now move on to this next phase of restructuring. What are our priorities, and what are the priorities that have been expressed in this debate, which I think has been a useful debate? First, we must transform our SMEs. Second, we must transform jobs and develop every talent. Third, we must transform our culture and our norms at the workplace and in some regards in our society. So in short, we have to transform our economy and we have to transform our society if we succeed in this restructuring journey and achieve a high productivity, high income society. And it's unrealistic to achieve this in a few years. It's going to take some time, but we have to have a determined approach to the problems, put resources into it, and make sure we move at a continuing clip, make sure we move at a steady clip. A decade from now, if we move at this clip, we will be in a different place, where firms will be able to survive with good profit margins, workers will have higher incomes, and the reason why you can achieve both higher incomes and good profit margins is productivity would have been transformed. So the first priority is transforming our SMEs and help them overcome the constraints of a tight labor market and high business costs. They remain at the core of our economy, as many MPs spoke about it. Denise Paul, for instance, yesterday spoke about this. We have to make sure that our traditional businesses remain a unique part of Singapore society. And as Mr. Teo Song Sing says, there's no reason why traditional businesses, including our many family-owned businesses, cannot be dynamic players in the new Singapore. By applying new management concepts, by going for strategies that are seen amongst other firms, including the larger firms, our traditional businesses do have a role to play in the future Singapore economy. And our SMEs have come a long way in the last 10 years alone. If you just look at two things, and I'm just picking two things, if you look at broadband access, for instance, 10 years ago, 40% of SMEs had broadband access, now it's 80%. And in this year's budget, we're going to give them high-speed broadband access. Second, they're far more internationalized than they were before. The Chinese Chamber did a survey of SMEs. They found that, in fact, 60% of those surveyed were now venturing abroad. Thirdly, many more Singapore brands are now known abroad. It used to be SIA and Creative and Singtel. Now there are many other brands. It's Hyflux, Ezrings in the offshore and marine sector, SC Auto in manufacturing, Charles & Keith in the retail sector, Eu Yan Sang in healthcare, and many other names that you can think of, well known in Asia especially. So they have made progress, the SME sector. But we've got to redouble our efforts in this next decade. And I don't think it is just a matter of government support, because frankly, the level of support we're providing is unmatched internationally. Whatever aspect you think of, it's automation, technology, R&D, design, training of employees, we're providing very substantial support. But we've got to give our SMEs time, keep up the pace of restructuring, and every time we see innovations arising, try to spread those innovations. One important approach is the sector-wide approach, which is an emphasis in this year's budget and which we will take forward, going for sector-wide solutions. And I'll just give you one example, which is in the wholesale sector. We're developing, in fact, we have an e-procurement hub for SME wholesalers. It's enabled about 200 SME wholesalers to transact electronically with their large customers, with the large retailers, thereby improving inventory management. Also, it provides a shared platform for accounting and business intelligence functions. So it saves them costs, saves them manpower. And the interesting thing is that this was a solution developed by an SME itself, which IDA then went in to lend support for, and many other firms have hopped on to this platform. So we want our SMEs to be a vibrant part of the future Singapore economy, and we'll provide as much support as it takes to help them to get there. The second focus is to transform jobs and to develop every talent, as Ms. Jessica Tan had emphasized. And it involves every job. As Mrs. Lim Swee Say says, every job has to be professionalized. He cited the gardener in Japan, the cleaner in Germany, the waiter in the US. Every job has to be professionalized and can be. It's not about preserving jobs the way they were in the past, but it's about making every job better for the worker, and thereby helping every worker to contribute to our upgrading. That's one challenge. We know what the existing jobs are and how we have to make them better. But we also have to prepare for jobs of the future, many of which do not exist today, as several speakers pointed out, including Ms. Irene Ng. Many don't exist today. The experts say that if you take people who are young today, those who are in our primary schools, by the time they enter the workforce, computers will be 100 times cheaper and 100 times smarter on current trends. It'll mean a very different workplace, whether it's services or manufacturing. Every area of economic activity will be different because the digitalization of the economy is proceeding apace. In every major economy and every economy that is globalized, is proceeding apace. And it transforms not just businesses, but it transforms jobs. Several MPs spoke, including Ms. Tan Su Shan, spoke about the challenge this poses to middle-end jobs, middle-income, middle-skill jobs. You're already seeing it in the United States. They call it job polarization, where the middle end is disappearing and the top end is growing, and the very bottom end, the middle end is shifting to the bottom end. Lots of bottom end jobs being created. You're seeing it in the United Kingdom. We face that challenge here in future. So far, we've been able to have near full employment, but this will be a challenge as technology proceeds apace. And we have to prepare for that new world. It will not be a jobless world. It will not be a jobless world. And particularly for Singapore, a small country with the world as its market, it will not be a jobless world. If we stay competitive, if we get our fundamentals right, we can create jobs. There'll be many jobs that involve working with technology and using technology to gain competitive advantage. Jobs in engineering, in system and product design, in systems management, people who can troubleshoot problems, solve complex problems, jobs in programming, in data analysis, in ICT, and jobs in the creative industry, which Janice Koh had spoken about. There will also be many jobs that involve personalized service in the hospitality industry, in healthcare, and in social services, including education. The social sector is going to be a major area of job creation in the future. But no one knows for sure what jobs are going to be around 20 or 30 years from now. We know what the broad sectors are. We know that there will be jobs, but you can't say for sure exactly what jobs they'll be. And that is why, as several MPs have highlighted, we have to also focus on developing obsolescence-proof skills, as Ms. Irene Ng put it. The skills that apply regardless of what jobs come. And we know roughly what they are, but we'll have to keep sensing the skills that are in need in the market. This being inquisitive, thinking in original ways, the habit of continuous learning, and very importantly, the ability to interact with others and to respect everyone, the soft skills. And this is something which MOE is focusing on in the early years, all the way through the school system. But secondly, very importantly, we have to redefine education. And we are redefining education so that it's not simply a matter of what we do in schools and tertiary institutions, and then you have a separate phase altogether, which is what we do in the workplace. It's not about two distinct phases of education and learning in a person's life, where most education is over by the time you finish school or ITE, poly, or university, and you get your cert, and then you have a little bit of training after that as you go through working life. It has to be a continuum that involves regular refreshing of knowledge and skills throughout our lives. That has to be the new concept of education. If we want to develop every talent and keep adapting to this new world, including the new jobs that will come along, it has to be a continuum. We have a world-class school system, we know that. And our challenge is now to complement that world-class school system by having one of the best systems of lifelong learning as part of that continuum. And we're willing to put significant resources into this. We are studying the whole CET framework. We are developing a whole new CET master plan, which we'll announce later in the year. But it will require resources, and these will be resources well spent. But I want to emphasize 2 points. First, that quite apart from the government putting in resources, the business community plays a very important role. And it'll play a role in a somewhat different way from what has been the case before. It's not just about investing in your own employees, and if you're worried about whether they'll still be with you 3 or 4 years from now, you don't invest as much. Every business has to invest in its employees. As the economists put it, you have to invest in the commons. Every business has to invest in its employees, and if everyone does so, we raise the human capital of Singapore society. Everyone moves up. And everyone benefits, because in a small society like Singapore, what goes around comes around. You invest in your employees. Some may not be with you 5 or 10 years from now, but everyone has been raised to a different level and is constantly moving up. That is really what we have to see. Everyone has to be invested in, every Singaporean has to be invested in with constant skills upgrading, and everyone will benefit, including our businesses. And we will help, the government will help. We will also help Singaporeans themselves to take charge of their learning and their development. And this is a very important strategy going forward as well. Strengthen career guidance, strengthen knowledge of careers from early on. There are some suggestions in the debate about starting in secondary school. In fact, MOE is starting this. Internships and work attachments, even when the boys and girls are in secondary school, and especially at the tertiary stage, which is the work of the Aspire Committee, developing meaningful work engagements when students are in tertiary education, and in particular our ITEs and polys. But beyond the internships and the early attachments, it really has to be a continuous process where we have to conceive of lifelong learning as one that involves regular infusions of education and learning at different times in our career. And we have to think ahead about the challenge, put the resources, and plan a whole new framework for CET that enables us to do this. There are examples. MOE, for instance, started a decade ago, a system where teachers and principals, every teacher and principal, after a period of years, can take time off to learn. Some go on work attachment, some go abroad, some do something in another field of education before coming back. Constant infusion of skills and knowledge. There are many possibilities, and we'll have to study this. It will require resources, but this will be resources well spent. We have to redefine education and invest in this next lap in education that has to do with complementing a world-class school system with a world-class system of lifelong learning. Third challenge, transforming culture and social norms. And many MPs spoke passionately about this. Ms. Foo Mee Har, Ms. Penny Low, Mr. Patrick Tay spoke about this. And I don't want to cover the same ground which I've stated in the budget speech and which MPs have very eloquently and thoughtfully spoken about. It's a softer area, less tangible, but we all know it underpins everything else we want to do. If we want to achieve the first two objectives of transforming our SME sector and transforming jobs, we also have to transform the workplace culture and our social culture. We know that. The NPCC, the National Productivity and Continuing Education Council, will give this great attention in the next few years. It's something that's going to take time, but we're going to place special emphasis on this. Not just the hard skills and technologies involved in upgrading, but helping companies upgrade management practices and helping them to reshape the workplace culture with their employees. This requires much more emphasis, and we'll be working together with companies and working with everyone to get ground-up ideas as to how best we can do this and support this. So it's a very important priority as we go forward. I don't want to mention this, go through the specifics again. It's been very well discussed, but I just want to highlight a point which Dr. Lam Pin Min and Mr. David Ong and Mr. Ang Wei Neng a short while ago emphasized, which is that one dimension of this that we have to think very hard about is the way in which we include older workers in the workplace and in our economy. And it has to be more than, the reason why companies have to do this is not just because of a tight labor market and they have no choice but to employ older workers. And it's not just because we're trying to help older workers build up retirement savings and therefore we want them to work for longer. Those are the economic reasons, or economic and financial reasons. It's also because, as Mr. David Ong says, it's ultimately about self-worth, dignity, and productive aging. It's a social objective. And when we think about this issue, therefore, it's not just about the financial strategies, it's really about changing the way we think about every Singaporean, maximizing the worth of our older workers, finding ways in which they can add value as part of the team. And this involves transforming mindsets, which is why I wanted to emphasize this particular point that came up, I think, very usefully in the debate. And the government will play its role. We'll support this in every way we can. We've got the special employment credit. The public sector is playing its role. For instance, MOE, again, if I just use that example, is drawing on many retired teachers, retired educationists, involving them in a very meaningful way as we upgrade our education system. But the business community has to treat this as a strategic priority and responsibility, because we can only create an inclusive society in the true sense if, as Mr. Yeo Guat Kuang says, we give everyone a chance to have a job and a meaningful opportunity to contribute. Next aspect of social norms that I just want to mention briefly is the importance of moving to a system where self-service becomes the default option and something which customers even prefer. If you look at what's happened in the financial industry, for instance, it's quite interesting. We now treat ATMs as the default. ATMs and internet banking are in fact the default option. Not long ago, everyone wanted to go to a bank branch, speak to the officer across the counter, see the passbook being updated in front of your eyes and make sure it's updated. How many people still do that? Some of our older folks still want to do it, but for most Singaporeans, the ATM is the default option now. And for many, in fact, internet banking is the default option. And we're going to go further because in June this year, we will be introducing what's called the FAST system, Fast and Secure Transfer System, electronic funds transfer, which allows consumers and businesses to use electronic devices to transfer funds between banks almost immediately. Today, it takes 2 or 3 days, transfers of funds between banks. It'll be almost immediate. So these are the changes that we have to make in every industry. Make self-service the default. I'll give you another example, real estate. In Australia, the majority of real estate transactions are exclusive agency arrangements. And because they're exclusive, it's a sole agent system, the agents are happy to put all the information about a property online or in newspaper ads. They leverage on ICT, so when you in fact go and look at a house or a property, you can look at the prospective buyer can look at the floor plans, look at the different rooms, take a virtual tour of the entire property through online property ads. As a result, basically the prospective buyers do a lot of self-service before contacting the agent. And this is another example I'm giving, but it applies in many other industries. In every industry, we can think of how self-service can in fact provide good service, but it also saves on manpower and takes us to a new and higher level. So these 3 priorities go together. Transforming our enterprises, especially our SMEs, transforming our jobs and developing every talent, and transforming our culture. And we will not succeed unless we do all 3. Let me move on now to the issue of social spending and especially finding the right balance in our social spending. I'll start with the Pioneer Generation Package, which, as I mentioned earlier, there's been very strong support for uniformly in the House. Strong support for the fact that it is focused on healthcare needs, strong support for the fact that it is being given to all pioneers regardless of income, and strong support for the fact that we are setting aside fully now the funding required for the package, for the entire life of the package, and that it is fortunate that we have the means to do so because of our prudent fiscal policies. I think those were three features of the Pioneer Generation Package which were very important defining features and which have received strong support in the House. There were some important questions that were raised about the implementation of the package, and the first issue has to do with when the package will be implemented. How quickly are we going to implement this package? And Dr. Teo Ho Pin in particular had asked about whether we can bring forward the CHAS benefits, the ability for the Pioneer Generation to benefit from the extra subsidies in our GPs. We've, in fact, studied this very carefully, and we've decided to bring forward the Pioneer Generation CHAS benefits from January 15 next year to September this year, so that it would come into place at the same time as the enhanced subsidies in our specialist outpatient clinics, so that across the outpatient sector, polyclinics, specialist outpatient clinics, and the GPs, from September this year, the Pioneer Generation will be able to get their enhanced subsidies. And before September, every member of the Pioneer Generation will get a Pioneer Generation card, which can be used at the GPs, it can be used at the dental clinics, at the SOCs, and the polyclinics. The card will be mailed to them by September. Before September, however, we will make the Medisave top-ups, the first round of Medisave top-ups for the Pioneer Generation. We will do this in early July. And this means that although Medishield Life is going to be implemented at the end of next year, end of 2015, we have 2 years of Medisave top-ups that the Pioneer Generation is going to enjoy that can help them to pay for their current Medishield premiums, help them to pay for a significant part of their current Medishield premiums, 2 years' worth of assistance to pay for the Medishield premiums using the Medisave top-ups. Ms. Sylvia Lim had asked whether the Medishield Life premium subsidies for our Pioneer Generation will cover not just Medishield Life, but the Medisave-approved private plans. The answer is yes. The Medisave-approved plans are integrated Shield plans, and they include Medishield as a basic component. And in future, the plans will include Medishield Life as a basic component. So those on integrated Shield plans will receive the same dollar amount of subsidies as those on Medishield Life. Next, the whole issue of outreach, which many MPs spoke about. This is a massive exercise. It's 450,000 Singaporeans. It's a task that involves IT systems. It is a task that involves many agencies and many points of contact, and we want to do this as well as we can. The first thing that we have to assure our pioneers, members of the Pioneer Generation, is that the benefits will be provided automatically. The pioneers do not need to worry. Even if they are unsure of the exact benefits, it's going to be provided automatically. Their cards, the Pioneer Generation cards, will enable them to easily identify themselves at the clinics to get additional subsidies. And even if they forget to bring their card, it's there in the computer system. They will get their Medisave accounts automatically topped up. And they do not need to have been CPF members working during, having worked earlier and had CPF accounts. They don't need to be CPF members. As long as they've signed up for our government schemes in the past, which almost all have, GST vouchers, growth dividends, the CPF would have opened a Medisave account for them. And in fact, over 430,000 of our Pioneer Generation already have Medisave accounts because of these schemes. So I think the bottom line is, as Ms. Irene Ng put it, don't worry. Whenever the Pioneer Generation express some anxiety as to whether they're going to get benefits, tell them, don't worry, you'll get it automatically. There's nothing to worry about. There's a very small group, less than 3%, who do not have Medisave accounts because we've been unable to contact them over the years, despite considerable effort by grassroots leaders, many people making the effort to contact them. Some have passed away overseas without their next of kin informing us. The NRIC addresses for some are also not valid. And we'll continue to work hard to reach out, to find them and reach out to them. It's a small group, but we'll have to keep working at this. The outreach effort will have to involve many different approaches, many different media, many different languages. MPs have all emphasized this. At this point is well taken. It's not just about printed brochures arriving in your letterbox. It involves personal contacts, it involves radio, it involves TV, and it involves languages that are most familiar to the pioneer generation. We will work, it will not be just a top-down outreach effort. We'll work with everyone on the ground, our grassroots leaders, all the staff in our healthcare settings, our GPs, our polyclinics, our outpatient clinics, work with staff at all the healthcare settings where people come for treatment. And we work with our VWOs as well, because they too have a lot of contact in the community care sector, especially with the pioneer generation. The online facility is there, especially for the younger family members. They're very familiar with looking up details online. But as I mentioned, the benefits will be provided automatically, and there's nothing to worry about. And if someone really needs to talk to a volunteer or officer to find out more, we already have today 26 Citizen Connect centers across the island where advice can be given on the Pioneer Generation package. Eligibility is the next issue. Mr. Baey Yam Keng and Mr. Lim Biao Chan, for example, had highlighted the case of individuals who had been living in Singapore and contributing from the time of independence, but were not able to get citizenship for various reasons until later. The appeals panel that we're setting up will be able to look into such cases. That's why we're setting up an appeals panel. It will have diverse representation. We'll have Singaporeans from a range of backgrounds, and this panel will be set up by the end of April, and we'll provide more details on this later. If I can move now to the issue of broader recognition of the Pioneer Generation, which many MPs spoke about. Beyond the Pioneer Generation package that the government is providing, what are the other ways in which the community and businesses can recognize our pioneers and our seniors, besides our pioneers, the seniors amongst our Singaporeans? This will be a collective effort, and as we approach Singapore's 50th birthday, special attention has to be paid by everyone to the role of our seniors. The Ministerial Committee of Aging has called for a special SG50 Seniors program to appreciate the role of our seniors in contributing to our nation. And the committee will engage businesses and organizations as part of our SG50 effort to offer special privileges to our seniors, whether it's discounts to places of recreation and leisure or other benefits, and also find ways to engage our seniors actively, help them to lead active and engaged lives. So this is an important initiative, and as part of SG50, we'll want to involve our businesses and community in recognizing and honoring the role of our seniors. Can I move on now, Madam Speaker, to a broader challenge, which is that of healthcare financing. This is, in fact, a key fiscal challenge for the future in Singapore, as it is for, in fact, many maturing societies. It is a key fiscal challenge that we face. And I want to spend a bit of time talking about the nature of this challenge and how we should address the challenge. Good quality, affordable healthcare has to be our priority. And we are making a few shifts in that direction in the last few years and in this year's budget. First, we're increasing the role of risk pooling through MediShield Life, provide all Singaporeans, including those with pre-existing illnesses, with protection against large hospitalization bills. So greater risk pooling. Second, we are increasing the government share of healthcare spending across healthcare settings, in hospitals as well as outside hospitals. The increased subsidies in this year's budget for specialist outpatient clinics, the increased subsidies in recent years' budgets for intermediate and long-term care services is an important shift. It's an increase in the government share of spending. We've introduced CHAS for primary care at our GPs. Medifund has also been strengthened, and we will keep it strong as part of the system. So that's the second part. The government is taking an increasing is taking on an increasing role in the financing of healthcare. But the third part is important, which is that we've got to preserve the role of individual savings through MediSave as a key pillar, individual responsibility for healthcare, and using individual savings as a key pillar of our healthcare system. And we are going to provide additional flexibility in the use of MediSave. Minister Gan Kim Yong will talk about it more at the COS. That will help in reducing out-of-pocket payments in polyclinics and other outpatient settings. This will be implemented in the first half of next year. But the sum of these changes that we made in the last few years are quite significant because we are providing much greater support in healthcare, not just for the low-income group, but for the middle-income group, and particularly in the outpatient, primary care, and step-down care sector. It's quite an important shift, and I'll just give you an example. If you take, and this is not a pioneer generation example, this is basically for, I give you the example of a couple in their early 60s, middle income. I'm not talking about the low income group, which in fact receives very significant assistance. Middle income couple, early 60s. The median household income per capita is about $1,700. So I've chosen the median household, about $1,700 per capita household income. And this is a typical case where the husband receives once a week day rehab care, or two to three times a week day rehab care. And the wife also visits the polyclinic and SOC, polyclinic twice a year, SOC 3 times a year. It's sort of fairly, not an uncommon example. Over the past decade, the policy shifts that we've made to increase subsidies for the middle income group, particularly outside hospitals, have meant that this couple would receive a quadrupling of the benefits that were in place a decade ago, 4 times more than was the case a decade ago. And in addition, as we expand home-based care in future, if the husband, for instance, stays at home and receives care, the household would see a 7.5 times increase in support compared to what we had in place a decade ago. So it's a very significant increase in support that we're providing for all Singaporeans. And as the couple gets older, they'll be getting MediSave top-ups through the GST voucher, not an insignificant sum. Each of them will get $250 a year. By the time they get into their 70s, it's $350 a year. Plus the enhanced benefits of MediShield Life, which cuts down on the risk of large bills in hospitals and which will come with subsidies from the government for the middle income group. So I just want to say that we've been making significant shifts, not just for the pioneer generation, but for all Singaporeans as they get older especially. But we have a larger challenge in future. Beyond these shifts that we are making, we have to look to the future and address the larger challenge of healthcare costs. To put things in perspective, or put the scale of things in perspective, the pioneer generation is 450,000 Singaporeans. 450,000 Singaporeans. The next generation, age 45 to 64, is 1 million Singaporeans. And they will be entering into retirement 10 to 20 years from now. That was called the baby boom. They will be entering into retirement 10 to 20 years from now. That is a very important challenge that we have to meet, how we can provide quality care in an affordable way. And it first involves appreciating very fundamentally 2 facts, 2 key points that we have to bear in mind. And the first is that it is a misconception that countries that spend more are doing a better job in providing healthcare. Spending more doesn't mean better healthcare. The evidence is very clear on this internationally, that it is a misconception that merely spending more means better healthcare. Some countries have very high spending, but in fact have much weaker healthcare outcomes than others. And I'll show you a chart to illustrate this. This is a set of mainly advanced countries, plus Asian countries like Hong Kong, Korea, Singapore, and Japan. The first thing you notice, of course, is, well, I have to explain the chart, that the horizontal axis has got total healthcare expenditure per capita. National expenditure, whether it's the government or insurers or individuals who are paying for it, this is total expenditure per capita. And the vertical axis is a health grade, which is that comes from Bloomberg's rankings of the world's healthiest countries, which looks at life expectancy, percentage of underweight children, proportion of people with high cholesterol, various indicators. First thing you notice, of course, is Singapore isn't doing badly on health grade. In fact, we are rated the best in the world. I don't know if it's true, but we are certainly doing quite well in healthcare outcomes. And we're doing it with relatively lower expenditure compared to other countries. Part of this is because we are a little younger as a society compared to the maturing European societies, but even if you adjust for that, we spend less on healthcare, but we achieve good healthcare outcomes. And then you see at the other end of the spectrum, the United States. People often refer to it in articles and wonder why we're not spending as much. Well, they spend a lot of money, but they've got very weak healthcare outcomes, in fact, much weaker than most other advanced countries. And if you look at the countries in the middle, there's very little correlation. Very little correlation between how much you spend and your healthcare outcomes. Now, why is it some countries are spending far more and yet not getting better outcomes? There are basically three reasons. First, particularly in the United States, prices are just much higher. The costs are much higher for any particular treatment you talk about. If you talk about a knee replacement, it's about 4 times the cost of Singapore. But prices are just far higher in the United States than in other advanced countries. That's the first reason. Second reason is very important because it applies to many countries, which is that incentives have led to over-prescription and over-utilization of healthcare services in many countries. So you end up just spending a lot more without commensurate improvements in healthcare outcomes. And this is, in fact, a very serious issue. It's an issue in countries where you have a fee-for-service model, where as long as doctors are prescribing new services, new treatments, their fees go up, their incomes go up. In the United States, in particular, the incomes can go up very significantly for prescribing additional services. So there's a second reason, that there is such a thing as overprescription and overutilization, which doesn't lead to better healthcare outcomes. That's the second reason. The third reason, which is very important also, is that there are many healthcare systems that provide universal subsidies for everyone across the board, the poor, the middle income, and even the rich. In fact, many advanced countries do that. They provide universal subsidies across the board at much higher cost. And it may make healthcare look very cheap for everyone at point of consumption, but it leads to much higher usage because it looks cheap, and people don't realize it, but they're actually paying for it in another way, through higher taxes. So universal subsidies where everyone benefits, leading to high utilization of the healthcare system, but the cost is in fact being paid through taxes, through insurance, through other means. So, and it's not just cases like the US. Japan is actually a very good example, because in Japan, health insurance covers a very wide range of services with very little control over access to treatment. The Japanese see physicians 3 times more often than in other developed countries, and they stay in hospitals 2 or 3 times longer than in other developed countries because the system incentivizes it. And it's got nothing to do with demographics, because the Japanese are by nature, in fact, or physiology, or it's nothing to do with their medical condition. It's all a matter of incentives. And the costs that you saw in that chart are not the end of it, because in the next 10 to 20 years, the costs are going to go up very considerably in these societies because of the incentives towards overutilization and overprescription. It's a very fundamental issue. So that's the first point. More spending doesn't mean better healthcare outcomes. The second key point I want to make is that there is in fact no free or cheap healthcare anywhere in the world. It can look cheap or free at point of obtaining the service because your insurance pays for it or the government has subsidized it. But the public is ultimately paying for it, either through taxes or hefty insurance premiums. It's not as if someone else is paying for it. The public is ultimately paying for it. Take Germany, where co-payments at point of treatment are very low, extremely low when you go to a hospital or even in the outpatient setting. The only reason why it's very low is because of very substantial contributions to payroll tax to set up what they call, a sickness fund. Both the employer and the employee contribute 15%, 15.5% in fact, of payroll tax that goes into a sickness fund. The 15.5% is entirely for sickness fund. So the worker and the employer, and when you think of an employer paying, it is actually out of wages. What would have gone into wages goes into the payroll fund, pays 15.5% for the sickness fund. And then when you finally go to the hospital or clinic, you think it's very cheap, but actually you've paid for it. It's actually prepaid health care with very few limits on how you use it. So this is a fundamental point that we have to understand. In fact, there's no cheap or free health care, although it sometimes looks like that. It is being paid for. So we will have to spend more on healthcare in future as our society goes up, as medical treatments that improve the quality of life become available. We will have to spend more, but we have to do it in a cost-effective way and prevent the total healthcare bill from spiraling upwards, because everyone will have to pay for that. We have to prevent the total healthcare bill from spiraling upwards. And to do this, we have two key strategies. First, to rebalance the structure of our healthcare system, and second, to ensure that we have the right incentives for everyone, doctor, patient, insurer. First strategy of rebalancing the structure of the system has been spoken about. Dr. Lam Pin Min has been talking about this for some time, in fact, and spoke about it again in the debate, and several others spoke about this. The need for us to place much greater emphasis on primary care and on community care. Primary care through our GPs especially, community care through our rehab centers, home-based care, nursing homes, and so on. This is very important in our next phase. In the near to medium term, we still have to expand our acute hospital capacity, and we're going to invest significantly in acute hospitals. But in the longer term, it's really the expansion of capacity in primary care and community care that will ensure that we prevent the total bill from spiraling out of control. We've got to invest in primary care and community care and rebalance our system away from an over-concentration on the acute hospitals. That's why we have CHAS. That's why we have stepped out, in fact, our subsidies for intermediate and long-term care to encourage people to get treatment and get care nearer the home or at home. This is a very important shift for the future, and Minister Gan Kim Yong will talk more about this at the Committee of Supply. So that's about the structure, but incentives are very important as well. Incentives for the healthcare professionals, incentives for Singaporeans ourselves. We have to first make sure that we avoid this problem of overprescription that we've seen in so many countries. The US is an extreme example, but there are many others that we can point to, including Japan, as I spoke about. We have to ensure that treatments which are subsidized, treatments which receive subsidized, are clinically necessary based on evidence and are cost-effective. And there's some interesting lessons we can learn from elsewhere in this regard. In fact, in the UK, in France, and Germany, they've set up institutions that look at evidence-based research to establish what are the effective treatments, what are the effective treatments and technologies for various illnesses, when should a specialist referral be made. And we can learn from some of these experiments and develop our own systems. Second, we have to promote more team-based care, in particular one that allows our nurses and our allied health professionals to play larger roles alongside our doctors. And here too, there are very good examples in Australia and elsewhere where nurses play a larger role, and Dr. Lam has also spoken about this. Third, we have to ensure that our healthcare clusters are encouraged to play a key role in managing the overall quality of care in and out of hospital. The clusters are not just the hospitals, but they involve primary care and they involve step-down care besides our hospitals. And our clusters have to take responsibility for overall care of the patient, both in and outside hospital. And the government will support new initiatives, new alternative approaches, such as telehealth. Khoo Teck Puat Hospital, for instance, has a telehealth system that involves nursing homes, where the patients and nurses in the nursing homes can communicate directly with the geriatricians at the hospital using telehealth. It saves on time, it's convenient, but it allows the patient to stay in the nursing home and not to be warded in a hospital. Finally, we all have to take responsibility for maintaining healthy lifestyles. And many MPs spoke about this. Mr. Gan Thiam Poh, Dr. Intan, many MPs spoke about this, the importance of healthy lifestyles, and the government will spare no effort, especially through the HPB, in promoting healthy lifestyles and early screening for all Singaporeans. So I've gone about this at some length because this is in fact a key fiscal challenge for our future, controlling total healthcare spending, and secondly, finding a fair balance in terms of who pays for that total bill, a fair balance between the individual, the government, the employer. It's a very important challenge for our future. And both the Ministry of Health and MOF will be quite seized with this issue over the next few years. Let me move on now to the third theme of this rounding up, which is the need to balance our budget as spending goes up in the future. How we have to plan for our higher infrastructural and social spending. First, expenditures will go up. We expect our expenditures to increase by another 2 percentage points of GDP by 2020. 2 percentage points of GDP. And beyond 2020, it may increase by at least another 1%. It will increase by at least another 1% of GDP. So that's 3% of GDP in total by 2030. It will be driven by two key components. First, infrastructural spending, and secondly, social spending, especially in healthcare. Infrastructure, I won't go through all the details, but basically, we have a lot more investment to do in our infrastructure. We're investing heavily in our rail lines, and in the next 10 years alone, we are going to expand our rail network by about 100 km, which is more than any other 10-year period in our history. And then by 2030, we are really doubling our entire rail capacity by 2030 to 360 km. Massive investment. Changi Airport, expansion of Changi Airport, another very important infrastructural investment. Terminal 5, in order that they can cater to many more passengers. And it's not just it's not just an infrastructural facility. This is a key industry in its own right. Staying relevant and competitive in the aviation space is an important economic strategy for us. And it's an important strategy to help the rest of our economy, because Changi Airport also supports our wider economy. So another very important investment and a very expensive one. Third, housing. Quite apart from the fact that we are building a lot more HDB flats, 100,000 new flats over the next few years. By 2020, 2/3 of our HDB flats, or more than 630,000 units, will be 30 years or older. So estate renewal, rejuvenation will be a very important priority as we go forward, and particularly in the next decade. We'll have to steadily upgrade and renew our HDB estates. So that too will be a source of increased spending. Social spending will increase, and I've explained the challenge in healthcare expenditure. Quite apart from what I was talking about with regard to, subsidies and the need for increased spending at point of treatment, there's an immediate infrastructural challenge. We are increasing public hospital capacity by 50%. Ng Teng Fong Hospital, Sengkang General Hospital, Woodlands General Hospital. We are increasing intermediate and long-term care facilities by 80% by 2020. Nursing homes, community hospitals, 80% increase in capacity by 2020. And we are increasing our subsidies, as I've spoken about. So in Budget 2012, 2 years ago, we had projected yearly total healthcare spending to double from 4 billion to 8 billion by 2016. 8 billion by 2016. We are in fact likely to reach the 8 billion figure, which is close to 2% of GDP, a year earlier in 2015. We're going to get there earlier. 8 billion of healthcare spending in 2015. And beyond that, healthcare spending will continue to grow. We expect it to reach about 12 billion by 2020. So from 4 billion in 2011, before we announced the change in 2012, to 12 billion by 2020. 3 times increase. 3 times increase. And beyond 2020, as our baby boomer generation enters into retirement, gets older, the bill will grow. So we have to spend more as our society gets older. But we're not spending less in other areas. In fact, if you just look at it demographically, you think, well, as your society gets older, you spend more on healthcare, and you spend less at the early stage of life because the cohorts are smaller. In fact, despite smaller cohorts, we are not spending less in education because we are spending a lot more per student. Smaller cohorts, but a lot more spending per student at every level, preschool, through our schools, and importantly in the tertiary sector, because we are expanding opportunities in the tertiary sector, including university enrollment going up to 40% of cohort. So spending a lot more in healthcare and for older Singaporeans, but other spending is not coming down. And in particular for our young, we've got to keep investing in them. More investment per student, per Singaporean. So how do we manage this? How do we manage this increase in spending and stick to prudent fiscal policies? First, as our spending goes up, we've got to ensure that all spending is judicious. We have to achieve value for money in every program and be obsessed with achieving value for money in every program. Second, we've got to target social subsidies at those who need them most. And for most of our schemes, this means more for the low-income group, but also some for our middle-income group. Avoid universal subsidies, as Mr. Ang Wei Ning just said. The Pioneer Generation is the exception because we're honoring a whole generation for what they've done for Singapore. But in general, avoid universal subsidies, stick to targeted subsidies that give more to those who need the most and also help the middle-income group. So that's our first strategy to do with spending. Second, we need to raise revenues over time to ensure that we can meet our future needs without the risk of persistent deficits. We're starting from a position of strength. We have a healthy fiscal position today. And this is because we made timely changes over the years to strengthen our revenue base and to develop a resilient revenue base. We increased the GST in 2007 while providing a significant package of offsets to help the lower and middle income group. And those offsets are now permanent. The GST voucher for the low income group is now permanent. We also put in place the net investment returns framework in 2008, which has been a major addition to our revenues and created greater resilience in our revenues as well. It provides 2% of GDP each year in our budget, about $8 billion, 2% of GDP. And to illustrate how significant it is, just think of many other countries which have exactly the reverse. Instead of bringing onto their budget 2% of GDP each year in net investment returns, they have to do the opposite. They have to find tax revenues to service debts, with 2% of GDP being the low end of the scale. Because in fact, if you look at most other countries, if you look at UK, Japan, many other countries, you're really talking about 3 to 4% of GDP each year that has to be found in revenues to service the debt. Exactly the reverse situation. So this is a real strength that we have in Singapore, and it comes about because we've maintained prudent fiscal policies over the years. We've built up our reserves, and we are now able to use the investment returns on our reserves to fund current expenditures. So our strong fiscal position has allowed us in the current term to set aside resources to meet future priority needs. And this is a prudent way of managing the budget. While you have the strength, set it aside because you know their needs in the future. We've set aside money for the Community Silver Trust, set aside money for R&D, and most significantly, we're setting aside monies for our Pioneer Generation. But what do we expect going forward? because beyond this term, it's going to be different. Our revenues are not expected to increase as a percentage of GDP. In fact, revenue growth may moderate. The asset market is likely to moderate. We're not going to get the same amount of asset market-based taxes as we've done in the last few years. Our foreign worker levy collections will also taper off as the foreign workforce growth slows down. So revenues are not going to increase as a percentage of GDP, but spending will go up as a percentage of GDP. So we will not have the current fiscal advantage that we have in the future. And at some point, our revenues will fall short of expenditures. This is a challenge which many other economies face, and Hong Kong, which is a very similar society to us in terms of its demographics and its challenges, faces the same challenge. They don't have to spend on defense and foreign relations, but in fact, they have the same aging workforce, and they have projected that within the next 7 to 10 years, they are likely to face structural deficits where revenues will fall short of expenditure structurally. And their finance secretary, Mr. John Tsang, has acknowledged this. In fact, in last year's budget as well as this year's budget, last year he acknowledged that the growth of government revenue will drop substantially if the tax regime remains unchanged. So they know they need to change, and that they, like them, we will run into structural deficits if we do not raise revenues in the next decade. So we must be prepared for the years ahead and build up our revenues for the spending needs of the next decade and beyond. How do we do it? Our approach has to be based on 3 principles. First, whatever our tax and revenue strategies, we've got to sustain a vibrant economy. Second, we've got to maintain a fair and equitable system of taxes and transfers, a progressive system of taxes and transfers. And third, keep the tax burden on the average Singaporean, the average household, keep the tax burden on the middle income low. 3 principles. Keep the economy vibrant, ensure that we have a fair and equitable system of taxes and transfers, and third, keep the burden on the middle income low. The first principle is very important. Dr. Alvin Yeo spoke about this. Dr. Janil Puthucheary spoke about it. We've got to keep our economy vibrant. That's central to our social strategies, because an inclusive society is a hollow concept if we don't have fruits to redistribute and share. We've got to keep the economy vibrant, and that's how Singaporeans' lives have improved. Economic competition is intensifying. It's not lessening, it's intensifying globally. The UK is bringing down corporate income taxes to 20% by next year. Taiwan has reduced its corporate income taxes to 17%, same as Singapore. And importantly, quite apart from taxes, the world of technology and globalization is reshaping the way business is being done. Reshoring back to the advanced economies is happening, particularly in the United States, driven partly by cheaper energy costs because of the shale oil and gas revolution. Advances in robotics and additive manufacturing are allowing for manufacturing to be done cost-effectively much nearer to their customer base, allowing for rapid prototyping and mass customization, catering to their markets. It used to be too expensive to do it in the United States. Now it's becoming increasingly possible because of advances in technology. And to be sure, our economic competitiveness package is not just about taxes. It's about a quality workforce, it's about an excellent infrastructure, it's about rule of law, our whole system of governance. It's about how as Singaporeans we make the system work well. Taxes are not the only factor. But the reality is we are a small country without a natural hinterland, and business does not need to be here. Ms. Jessica Tan made this point. Even knowledge-based businesses, creative businesses, they don't need to be here. They can be done anywhere in the world. And with technological advance, they are being done everywhere in the world, sliced and distributed around the world and then brought together when it reaches the consumer. So we have to remain competitive so that we continue to attract investments and continue to grow talents. And that involves also retaining our own talents, Singaporeans, who are well qualified, well educated, and they are mobile. So It doesn't mean we keep taxes unchanged. It doesn't mean we keep taxes unchanged. For example, we made property taxes more progressive last year, and there's further room over time to enhance our asset taxes. We have to keep all options open. Second principle, a fair and equitable system of taxes and benefits. Equity. That's a very important second principle. And it means, firstly, that everyone has to pay some tax. Everyone has to pay some tax. I think that's a good society where everyone is contributing. The majority don't pay income tax. Majority of Singaporeans don't pay income tax, but they pay GST. Everyone pays something for a better Singapore. But those who have done better, those who are better off, should contribute more to society. And the lower income and the needy groups, those in need, should receive the bulk of the benefits, enabling us to level up society. That's our system. Everyone contributes something, but those who are better off contribute far more, and those in need receive more benefits than the taxes they pay. They're paying something in tax, but they receive more benefits back. And the GST is a good example. Not every tax in a progressive system needs to be a progressive tax. In fact, that's not an efficient system. Not every single tax or benefit needs to be progressive, but the system as a whole must be progressive. And the GST is a good example because the GST in its own right is a regressive tax. But when we increased the GST, we also made major changes in our other social policies, workfare, household grants, educational subsidies, many other changes that far more than offset the impact of a higher GST on the low-income group. It's not just a matter of the GST voucher. The GST voucher is one part of the permanent offset for the GST. It's a whole system of means-tested benefits that ensure that our poor get back far more benefits than the taxes they pay. In fact, for every dollar of tax they pay, they get at least $5 back in benefits, from childcare all the way to retirement. And in my budget speech, I had given the example of a low-income couple, the amount of benefits they get over a lifetime. I won't go through the details again, but it's a very progressive system of taxes and subsidies. If you look at the tax system alone, it is more progressive than, in fact, in several advanced countries. If you take the United Kingdom, for instance, in the UK, despite very high top marginal tax rates, the top 20% is paying 44% of all taxes. If you add VAT and income tax and everything together, council taxes, they're paying 44% of all taxes. In Singapore, the top 20% pays more than 50% of all taxes. It's about 52 or 53%. A highly progressive system. Next, I'll show you how things add up across the system. Taxes and transfers together. How do they add up? And how we have a system where those who are better off pay more taxes than the benefits they receive, and those who are less well off get more benefits than the taxes they pay. I should first explain that this chart shows the net benefits, net transfers. After you pay your taxes, what is the net amount you get in transfers? And as you can see, the bottom 50% in the income ladder receive significantly more transfers than the taxes they pay, and those at the higher end are paying more taxes compared to the transfers they receive. This is expressed as a percentage of household income. If I express it in dollar terms, of course, those at the high end will be paying a very large amount of dollars in net taxes, but as a percentage of income, it is lower. Now, I should mention also, and this is important because it comes into interpreting many of our other statistics, that I've left out the first decile here, which is the bottom 10%, because we have to understand that 2/3 of the bottom 10% are in fact retiree households who don't have incomes, but many of them are in fact not poor. 16% of those in the bottom 10% live in private properties. Another 13% live in HDB 5-room and executive flats. A fair number own cars and maids. The bottom 10% is basically anyone who's not earning an income anymore, but many of them are quite well off. So I've left the bottom 10% off from there, and in any event, because they don't have income from work, if I were to add them in, the benefits can't be expressed on the chart because as a percentage of income, it would be infinity. So, but the basic point is, if you look, for instance, at those in the second decile, which is our low-income group, they get a significant more amount of dollars in benefits compared to the taxes they pay. And compared to 10 years ago, it has shifted, because the blue bars reflect the situation in 2013, even before this year's enhancements, and the red bars reflect the situation in 2003, a significant shift towards progressivity in our fiscal system. And we are doing more. In this year's budget, we spoke about KIFAS, we spoke about the increased subsidies for preschool education, we spoke about the increased subsidies in the tertiary level. And I just want to mention one fact which didn't feature in the budget, but which is a continuing story in the education system, which is how we are doing more in the school system to help children who have difficulties in basic skills, literacy, numeracy, other areas. We are already spending 20% more for a child who's weak in literacy and numeracy throughout the course of their primary education compared to the average pupil. And over the next few years, by 2017, this will increase to 40%. We'll be spending 40% more because of MOE strategies on children who are weak compared to the average being spent on all pupils. Important initiative. So, to summarize, whatever we do to raise revenues in future, we have to retain this fair and progressive system of taxes and transfers. Third priority, keep the tax burden on the middle income low. It's an important objective of our system, and Singaporeans want it to remain that way. This chart, which I show, will show average tax paid by the median worker. In Singapore, that's there in red. Average tax paid by the median worker. This is just income tax and GST. Significantly lower than other countries. In fact, it's lower even than Hong Kong, because in Hong Kong, income tax starts from the first dollar. It's like the UK system. In our system, most people don't pay income tax. The low income pay GST. So the average tax on the median worker is very low by international standards. And even if you include all other taxes, foreign-made levies, taxes on cars, if you include all other taxes, we still remain a relatively low-cost country, a low-tax country for the middle-income group. This compares Singapore with the UK, and this looks at what's called the middle quintile, those from the 40th to the 60th percentile, the middle quintile. Basically, the effective tax rate, this is real data, this is what all the taxes amount to. Effective tax rate, the amount of taxes as a percentage of the incomes, is about 10%. For those who own a car, it'll be somewhat higher. Those who don't own a car, it is lower. For those who own a car, it's about 7%. Okay? So that's our system. And we have to keep that tax burden on the middle income low so that they get to keep as much as they earn. That's our principle. Help the incomes go up and help them to keep as much as they earn. So that it is principally the higher income group that pays significant net taxes into the system, which we use to help the lower income group so they can get significantly more benefits than the taxes they pay. So we have to keep these approaches in mind in future years. We have a strong revenue position for now, but in the decade ahead and beyond, we're going to need more revenues to meet our infrastructural and our social needs. Keep our economy vibrant, keep a fair and progressive system, keep a low tax burden on the middle income group. And that is how we'll keep Singapore a nation of opportunities with assurance for all, and a country that is fair and equitable to its citizens. And as Mr. Seng Han Tong says, we are in a very unusual situation. We have a system where we have the heart as well as the strength. I think you used a familiar Chinese saying for this. We have the heart as well as the strength. There are many other countries where the heart, and they're waiting for a future government to deliver the strength. We have the strength. We are able to do things with the heart, provide quality care, provide services in a humane way, but because we have prudent fiscal policies that make sure we can afford it, and we must stick to that system of having the heart and having the strength. So let me conclude very briefly, Madam Speaker. We've had a very good debate, as I mentioned, very strong support for the restructuring of our economy and raising our productivity, including transforming our SMEs, transforming our jobs, and transforming our social culture. Strong support for the steps we are taking to build a fair and equitable society. And strong support for prudent fiscal policy, which has allowed us to set aside a package to honor our pioneer generation, set aside the funds today for the full life of that package. But it's worth emphasizing a point which Ms. Penny Low made, which has to remain our key focus for the future. And she made a very good point, I think, which is, what matters most to the pioneer generation? Actually, what has always mattered most to them is that the next generation does better than them. And we all know it. We know it from every mealtime, we know it from every conversation we have in the community. That's what they're like. They want their children, they want the next generation to do better than them. They are like that. And because they are like that, Singapore is like that. We are like that. We want our children to do better. So every budget must be focused on our future, investing in our young, opening up opportunities, and helping them to create a better Singapore. Madam Speaker, thank you.